Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Land, Oceans, and Business podcast. The last few episodes have all been about sustainability and business, but today we're changing things up a bit. We are starting a series again of episodes with our environmental partners. Today we have Dr. Stephen Fitch, but as he just told me, he prefers to be called Steve. He's the CEO and co founder of Accelerated Restoration Collaborative, also known as ARC. ARC is dedicated to preserving and revitalizing ecosystems, focusing on the restoration of forests, wildlife habitats, and giving jobs to local communities. We'll be talking about the incredible job that ARC is doing and learning how their methods are creating long lasting results for both local communities and ecosystems. So, with this intro said, welcome, Steve. We're so happy to have you here in the Land, Oceans, and Business podcast.
Well, thank you, Isabella. Wish I was in Rome with you. Beautiful.
Amazing, Steve. So, to warm things up, how was ARC created? What's your origin story in the environmental sector?
Well, I've been in the sector for a little over 20 years now, and it all began oddly. I was working volunteering work rather extensively in traditional development projects in Ethiopia and became quite close friends with President Haile Mariam of the Southern Peoples Region. And I always say it this way: one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to ask a politician, "How can I help you?" Because we'd already built hospitals and clinics and schools and so many other things, but he asked me to take over a restoration project that was fully funded and expertly led, but after 3 years had no surviving trees. And for whatever reason, he believed from my relationship with him that I had the capacity to raise money and to organize people and get things going. So, bottom line is, it started that way. And the actual methodology that I'll talk about a little later is the result of my doctoral studies.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. It's a great story. I think taking on a project and then building what you have been building with ARC. I think it's beautiful to see the results. And as you said, you will get into it later, but I really can't wait to learn. Also, for me, as I was telling you before starting, it's also an episode where I get to learn a lot about the fantastic work that you're doing. So it's really exciting. So, as you said here with ARC, you are merging a lot social and environmental sustainability here. So, the next question is a bit about that. How do you see both social and environmental sustainability merging through the work that you are doing?
Well, I think it's essential that we recognize that humans are a part of the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's cynics who would say the fastest way to reforest the world is to get rid of all the people. Well, that's real cheery. Let's not do that. Let's learn to work cooperatively together.
Yeah.
And in the model that came out of my doctoral studies, we now call it employ to restore. It
Hmm.
really means to provide the dignity of employment to people who almost in every single case, not every single case, the majority of the cases, they've never had a cash paying job in their lives.
Hmm.
And so they've frequently had to live off and at the expense of their local environment, make just a little bit of money to barely survive. So the employ factor, the income that takes away that desperation that leads to the destruction of their local environment.
Yeah.
And for instance, with the original project in Ethiopia, the reason that project failed after 3 years, no surviving trees, is the organizers of the project literally were not paying the workers at all. They were requiring them to work in the nursery and to plant the trees. And I don't think too many people would like to be forced to work. I think there's a term associated with that's not very popular. We'll let it go. But bottom line is, we're part of the ecosystem. And when we work well together, the ecosystem can thrive again as a whole.
Absolutely.
Everyone benefits.
Yeah, I fully agree. So I think you mentioned here something very important, and this utopian, dystopian idea actually that if humans were removed, then Earth would just keep on doing its thing, which is absolutely true, but it's completely unreal Right now, who knows in 200 years or 300 years where we will be, but right now the reality is that we are here and we are reproducing, populations are keeping increasing, and that's just the reality that we have. And then the other reality that we have is the level of inequality that there is around the globe, right? Most of these communities that you are working with, I guess, are coming from lower income communities. So the whole idea is to bring them in and merge them into environmentalism. How can we train them? How can we educate them? How can we give them the tools to give back to the planet, but also give back to themselves and their family? And I think that once you find that sweet spot, then you're really doing a great job. And I think that this is a bit of the work that ARC is doing, right? The sweet spot between both of them.
It is. And he used the word utopia and get rid of all people, maybe dystopian. I'm not sure if that's the word or not.
Yeah.
The challenge that we have right now is the wealthy Western developed nations are wanting the other nations of the world to stop cutting down their trees. A little
Yeah.
bit hypocritical because cut down ours. I
Yeah.
mean, when you go back to the first arrivals of the colonials in America, they say a squirrel could jump from tree to tree across half the country. And I've driven across that half many times now. And unless that squirrel can jump 10, 15 miles at a stretch, it's not going to happen anymore.
Yeah.
So, bottom line is we can work well together. Um, and we do have the financial resources to make this possible. It's not outside of our capacity to achieve.
Interesting. So, Steve, actually, my next question is a bit about the challenges that you are facing. So, I can imagine that as you have been growing, of course, the impact that you're doing has also been increasing. But I guess that as you increase the impact that you're doing, you also start to understand the challenges that there are. Of course, you have many years of experience, as we were saying before, over 20 years. So, you're very familiar with the potential challenges that comes with protecting and restoring landscapes. But I also think it will be super important to touch upon them a little bit about these challenges that you face when trying to protect and restore.
Well, there's so many challenges, and it does actually vary from one ecosystem, one nation, one culture to another.
Of course.
Um, for instance, the ecosystem that I've worked with most often is the restoration of mangrove systems.
Hmm.
And what do you face? What challenges are faced there? Um, a lot of the areas that are historically mangrove have been turned into fish ponds and shrimp ponds that have been abandoned because the feeding of the fish and the shrimp and the waste byproducts is just so toxic,
Hmm.
so horribly toxic that nothing will grow in there until you have a total soil restoration to start off with. But in those areas that have just mangroves that have been deforested, though it's a whole lot easier, but it's still not easy. Then you've got dry forest systems like in Madagascar or in many places in Brazil, where the quality of the soil is atrocious. The nutrients have leached out. And then there's, of course, the challenge of fire. And then part of the challenge is we're dealing with people who experienced extreme poverty the majority of their life. For them to try something new is a huge risk. When you ask them to do this, especially without pay, which we never do,
Yeah.
um, bottom line is if it doesn't work, then they've really wasted their time and they're really in trouble because they didn't grow a food crop or
Yeah.
something of that nature. So it it's the challenge is, can you gain the trust and respect of the local populations? You've got to make it worth their while to do that. Then this one I'll just touch on briefly. It doesn't sound very egalitarian. It doesn't sound um, perhaps to some it's critical, but the level of corruption in government in many nations is so high.
Hmm.
And there's an organization called Transparency International, and they have what's called the Corruption Index. And once you're below 60, your culture is corrupt. You can expect the judges to be corrupt, the police to be corrupt, the politicians to be corrupt. And there's in Madagascar, there's a statement that says it's better to know the judge than it is to know the law.
Yeah. Wow.
That's rather telling.
Yeah.
And so you've got to find ways to work well in that culture and not get caught up in the corruption of the system.
Yeah.
And that's pretty tricky. Um, but the key is to win the hearts and the minds of the local populations and keep the judges and the police in check. You give enough people a job and they begin to develop their own sense of authority.
Wow. Steve, just
So,
a question here. Actually, two questions come to mind. Sorry if I'm interrupting, just super quickly. The first one, what type of communities are these one? Are these from small towns? Are these because of course you mentioned Brazil. So if you were talking about Amazon rainforest, something that comes to mind are indigenous communities. What type of people do you work with when it comes to your impact?
yeah, and it varies again from nation to nation. For instance, we're working in some massive mangrove estuaries in Madagascar that next to uh, Majunga, the regional capital. So
Hmm.
you actually have a large city next to a forest system, but that's a little bit unusual.
Hmm.
Most of the time, we're dealing with some level of specific indigenous community or mixed indigenous community that are there, and very rural communities, because the goal is to restore uh, as much as possible very large, some call it landscape size projects that really make a significant regional environmental difference. Work.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So, about the people from the ground, of course, now we're talking and focusing mainly on the local communities, but I'm guessing that when it comes to restoration for mangroves or for dry lands or forests, because you mentioned that you work in many different type of ecosystems, tell us a bit about the different stakeholders, Steve. Like, which is the role of the stakeholders to make the positive impact that you do happen?
Well, I mean, there's so many stakeholders. There's, of course, the sponsors, the
Yep.
government. The ones that really matter are the closer you get to the local community, the more significant the real world impact is. Because, frankly, the majority of the time, the political structures and infrastructure in developing world nations don't really exist in very remote communities.
True.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
they're not involved. They're just not there.
Yeah.
Gaining the trust and having meaningful relationships with the local leadership structure is huge. And the stakeholders that matter most are the people that are actually out there producing the trees in the nursery, planting the trees in the ground, and protecting. And the stakeholders that I like the best over
Mm.
the years are the women who are working with ARC. Um, I have been accused from time to time of being non-egalitarian. I think this is egalitarian. Women are tend to be much more responsible, and they yeah, I thought you'd like that, Isabella. Um, there's a receptive audience. Bottom line is they work so hard
Mm.
and are so responsible with the money that's entrusted to them. They put their kids in school.
Yeah.
They do all the right stuff
Yeah.
with the funds that are being entrusted to them. And the men sometimes do, most of the times do, but there's more exceptions with men than there are with women. And I don't know if I answered your question properly, but that's what comes to mind.
No, you did. You did perfectly. And I think it makes all the sense that the center, in terms of the focus of stakeholders, is the local communities and the women. Well, Steve, I have to say I'm completely biased as well, but I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. But it makes sense, right? If
Yeah,
there's a woman who has two kids, three kids, she's the main caretaker. I'm guessing that
yeah.
in many of these local communities, at least I'm speaking from Colombia, not for the rest of the globe, but when you go to the rural areas, the low income, the more remote areas, first of all, it's all done very informally. And second of all, it's more common to see single women taking care of the kids and the whole
Hmm.
family. So it makes all the sense that when they have the opportunity to do such a beautiful job, give back to the planet, also add to their own livelihood, and earn money, they're going to use it, of course, for the long term well being of herself and of the family.
Yeah, and also one of the oddities, and you'd think of from our quote unquote developed wealthy cultural perspective, most people don't realize that women are responsible for the kids, for so many things. Plus, in many cases, they're the ones out there working hard, um, making the charcoal or doing the work that was environmentally destructive. And so you come along and you give them the opportunity to have a job that is easier
Yeah.
and pays much more, and is non-destructive. Sign them up. They want in. Um, I think I've just talked everybody into hiring you and not me. So,
I think we have to speak the truths, and it's beautiful to see that this is how, first, your perspective, but also based on the evidence that you see on how you see women. Of course, you're working very closely with all of these people, so you know better.
yeah, the thing that's interesting is I've worked now in this sector across 14 different nations. So very different cultures,
Yeah.
everything from Brazil to the Philippines to Nepal to Madagascar to Ethiopia, etc. And bottom line, it's a truth that's largely across cultural lines, and it's not confusing after tens of thousands of examples. So, yeah,
Well, I'm so happy to hear that you're such a big, first egalitarian, and that you're such a big, like, cheerer. I don't know how you say it in English, but you're cheering out for
cheerleader.
cheerleader. You're
Yeah.
cheering for these women, so that's great, Steve. Steve, of course, now we're focusing a lot on the social and the local communities, but I want to take the image a bit bigger now. And this is, of course, the sponsors slash the donors that can also make your impact happen. And those are, I'm guessing, the big corporations, businesses, I don't know if philanthropies as well. So I would
Mhm.
love to ask you, what do you think the role is of businesses when it comes to sustainability? And this can be sustainability in general, the role that they have for the climate crisis, or the role that they have in supporting organizations like yours.
Well, I tend to think different than a lot of people around me, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's not so good. Here's part of what I feel. I would I would invite supporters to do their best to ditch that means get rid of the buzzwords. Sustainability, what does that mean? It's become a buzzword.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm so happy
what
you
are,
say
what
that.
are,
Yeah.
what are we really trying to do? We're trying to make the world a better place. And I would say the key is don't become fixated on buzzwords. It sounds very academic, it sounds very intelligent, but it's not going to capture the heart
Yeah.
of the average person.
Mhm.
Speak their language, and really tell a story. And if it's all about buzzwords, sustainability, carbon capture, things of that nature, their eyes are going to glaze over because they've heard that. The other is, if at all possible, be positive.
Yeah.
So, and be more holistic. I think the biggest issue is be holistic because if you talk about the disaster of climate change, oh no, what do I do? It's an issue for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. And
It's
this is what we
overwhelming.
discussed. Yeah, this is what we discussed, right? A few weeks ago when we first met, that using the negativity discourse, the crisis discourse, the only thing it's doing is pushing people away instead of
Yeah,
incentivizing them to be more connected. Who wants to be connected with a story that is scary, with a story that means the end of the world? No one.
yeah. I'm pretty sure I can't fix nuclear or challenges. I'm pretty sure I can't turn the climate change
Yeah,
challenge. What I can do is I can, and this is the sponsor's job to communicate. You can tell the story of these two people in this village, in this nation,
yeah,
who planted this many trees and sent their kids to school and so on. It feels like something I can really do or you can really do
yeah.
that really does make a difference.
Of course it does.
As
And
opposed,
go, sorry, yeah.
well, I said you go for it.
Okay, nothing, Steve. What I was gonna say is that you're saying something super important, and I think it's the big game changer, and it's telling the story. If you don't tell the story, people lose empathy, where they cannot relate to the impact that
Right.
they're doing, right?
Right.
It's very hard. I consider myself a big collective thinker. I am someone that is very in touch with nature, with communities, with her environment. Just because I'm Colombian and I've always been very curious about other cultures, but I know that for most of the humans, they cannot relate to what is happening in Ghana or in Ethiopia. It's very hard for someone that is so far away to be connected with that story because there is no direct connection to that story. So I think that what you're doing, learning how to tell the story, give the resources through videos, through newsletters, through education, and it's very similar to what we do at Dots.eco, right? We do it in a very different way. We do it through the status updates. We are allowing people to leave their email, get notifications, what is happening with the coral reef that I am restoring, which organization is doing it, where is it done, who are the local communities doing it. And I think that this is the real game changer, being able to tell the story so that people are connected to the impact that they're doing.
Yeah. And you mentioned coral reefs. I grew up in part in the Philippine Islands. I used to be in these gorgeous coral reefs and then went back as an adult and saw them destroyed. And you think, okay, that's a bad story. But what I've learned, I've had a lot of saltwater fish tanks since I've become an adult. They're all out of frags that they weren't taken from the wild. They're right out of somebody else's tank. I found out it's not that hard to grow a coral. In fact, it's if you do the chemistry right, it's fairly easy. They grow like crazy. And I just love what restoration of different ecosystems and different problem solution approaches that are actually workable, achievable. Grow coral,
Exactly.
grow trees.
Of
It can be
course.
done.
Yeah, it can be done. It all depends, of course, in the type of organization doing it. For us, as it's very important to vet organizations thoroughly. Because I was talking today in another meeting that I had this morning, it's very hard to actually know, for example, if I'm going to partner with this organization, how do I know that they're not just planting random trees, invasive species, monocultures? So for us, it's very important to make sure that the work that is being done is very clean, transparent, and impactful. So we're also very happy and proud about the partnership that we have with ARC. So with that said, I want to ask you, Steve, actually about now going into a third stakeholder in impact making, and that's the individuals. What can individuals do to add their part? As we were saying, no one likes to hear the discourse of climate crisis, of a ticking clock, of news of Paris and people dying of heat or people dying because it's this, the only thing that is doing is pushing people away. So based on all the experience that you have, what can we do as individuals to add our part?
Well, I'm meeting next week with your CEO, Nadav.
Yep.
And I'm gonna talk to him about this specifically because he's a dreamer, and I always say it this way: I'm not Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not that level of genius leader, but I do have a dream. And what I would love to see is certainly businesses and groups like Dots.eco continue to do their good work. But
Yep.
wouldn't it be marvelous if there was a movement of millions and millions of individuals who said, for a little bit of money and a little bit of enthusiasm coming from me, I really can make a difference. I
Yeah.
can restore a small part of a coral reef. I can restore um, a small part of a forest. And if I get my family and friends to join in this, then that little part can become bigger and bigger. And
Yeah.
I just think we've been relying on the government or government agencies or the mega groups like the United Nations or even, you know what I'm saying, the EU, the USAID, all these groups that we think are going to fix the world. They've had 65, 75 years to do it.
Yeah.
It's people movement time. It's just the quote unquote average person doing just a little bit with, and then combining with their relational web, doing a little lot more and expanding out. And we live in an era of social media now where the average individual, if they were to not rip on the other person's political perspective, but begin to enthusiastically support a solution, maybe we could become a wave, a movement, a transformative energy that could change the world.
Yeah,
So
and
that's my
that's a
speech.
dream.
That's my
That's the
dream.
dream. That's the I
That's
have a
my
dream.
dream.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think it's a great dream. And I tell you, Steve, I have to say, I don't think it's impossible to achieve, especially now that we're talking about generations. And I know that you're super familiar with these, but okay, we're talking about Gen X, boomers. There's not that
yeah,
same level of consciousness that there is maybe with millennials or even more Gen Z. So now, right now, we have a group of people who are extrememely aware about their
right,
want to give back to the planet,
right,
to do good, to have this other level of awareness. And there is so much that we can do about it. And there are some crazy stats that I was reading about this report, and it's how about 70% of Gen Z want to purchase products from more sustainable brands. Like, this
right,
is where they're going. This is the reality, and all the businesses
right.
needs to also adjust if they want it or not. If they don't want to be sustainable, they don't have to be sustainable just because of that, but they will have to be sustainable because consumers will be demanding for that.
Well, all the research has been done, and everything you just articulated is spot on.
Yeah,
And it doesn't resonate at quite the same level with baby boomers. We figure, we're going to croak in a week or two. So what does it matter to us?
yeah,
It does matter to us. I want my grandchildren and my children to
exactly.
grow up
Yeah,
and know the beauty of the earth the way I've enjoyed it. I think if we appeal broadly, um, if it's not just the negativity and just the climate change, but caring for people, watershed management, all the benefits that come from forest restoration,
yeah,
um, and then get the Gen Zers, the Gen Xers, the millennials who have the ability to get the word out
yeah.
and get it away from technological idiots like me, and get the word out. It'll be wonderful. It would be a movement.
It would be. And as I told you, I think it's a dream, but I don't think it's a dream that is impossible to achieve, especially knowing that the target audience is on your side. It would be very difficult if they weren't. But look, I'm a Gen Z. I am on your side. Like, this is just how things are nowadays. Now, you're talking about social media. Yes, there is a massive leverage now. There is TikTok, there's X, there's Instagram,
Right.
there's so many different modes and ways to communicate. Even for writing, you have Substack, you newsletter, you have Medium. There's endless formats nowadays. So
Yeah.
I tell you, I would usually say it's very utopian, but when we're talking about the dream you have for the people that you're talking to, I think it's quite aligned. So I'm really excited to see how we will be able to work together, you and Nadav as well, two dreamers, which I think is always a great combination of people working towards something huge. And yeah, Steve, thank you so, so much. So just to start wrapping up, I would love to let the people know, the listeners, how they can connect with you or with ARC if they want to get in touch.
Well, just for the record, in my mind, I'm Gen Z, but then I look in the mirror and say, I'm not. Um,
You have the
so,
mentality. That's all that
yeah,
matters, the soul.
yeah. There's a dream, and then there's the nightmare of looking in the mirror. It's really easy. It's arcrestoration.org if you want to look at our website. Um, but jump in and support Dots.eco, and let's figure out ways to work together. We can make a big difference together.
Yeah, I fully agree. Steve, thank you so much for this great conversation. It was fantastic. I know that you can get into this for hours, and just one question we could cover in a massive 4 or 5 hours seminar.
Yeah.
So I hope that I didn't cut the time too much. I think we covered great amount and great information.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, Steve, for the conversation and for the great work that you do.
My privilege, and I look forward to hanging out in Rome or in California.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Right. Bye bye.